just hitting. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon session. We've got a few people just joining as we speak. So we have got a lot to cover in the next couple of hours, but what I will promise you is that we'll finish dead on 3. So I'll just keep admitting people as they join. So we are here today to chat about opportunities to win new work in the public sector. Everyone is welcome to this session, although it does have some focus on being a provider in the local marketplace to both Barnsley and Rotherham. So if you either are in the Barnsley and Rotherham borough areas and you're a provider and want to supply the public sector, or if you want to supply, say, Barnsley Council or Rotherham Council, this will hopefully be helpful to you. Just whilst people are joining, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you've joined one of Go for Growth's sessions before, you might know who I am. I'm Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders and directors of a social enterprise called Go for Growth. We exist to try and support both the procurement community and commissioning communities, but more importantly, the marketplace to try and take advantage of opportunities in the public sector. I'm from a procurement background, so this year is my 30th year anniversary in procurement, split 18 years in private sector and 12 years in public sector. So I've walked a mile in both pairs of shoes as a social enterprise and micro business owner working for the public sector. I've answered bids. As a public sector procurer, I've also let those bids. We're going to partially record this session today. So we've got a live exercise probably about 2/3 of the way through the session or halfway through the session. I'm going to stop recording when we get to that live exercise so that we can all take part without it being captured on the recording. So I'm going to record up to that point. I'm just going to admit some more people whilst we are chatting. So I'm going to record up to that point when we do the live exercise, and I'll pause the recording and then I'll pick up the recording again afterwards. If you want to be camera on or camera off, it's absolutely fine, whichever you feel most comfortable with. There's no mandate either way, so just do what feels right for you. If you're not speaking, if I can ask everyone just to keep their microphones on mute, but if you do want to come in and chat at any point or ask a question, please don't be overly polite. Please just come off mute and chip in. The more you want to discuss, the happier I am. So I'll answer any questions as we go. So please don't stand on ceremony. Please do chip in if you want to. What you'll get after today is a copy of the slide deck. You'll also get a copy of the recording that we do, excluding that live evaluation exercise. And what I'm going to try and cover is an overview of the contracts and process of how we go through contracts. We're going to focus on answering quality questions, and then we have that live evaluation exercise. So I dropped an email out with the slides around the evaluation exercise. If you haven't had a chance to read them, don't worry, we're going to go through them in the exercise itself. Then we'll pick up on social value and carbon reduction, and we'll be thinking about what those two things mean, but also what Barnsley and Rotherham councils specifically are looking for. And there's lots of commonality in those requirements alongside other organisations in the public sector as well. You might already be aware that in February this year, we had a change of regulation. So the rules and the legislation around procurement changed in the United Kingdom, specifically for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland remain on the previous regulations. So what I'm going to try and finish off with today, if we've all still got enough energy, I'm going to try and finish off with just a really brief overview of what the regulations look like and how they might be useful to us as bidders. So that's what we're going to run through. I have got just 3 questions I'd like to ask before we start, and I'm using something called Slido. So I don't know if everybody's got a smart device. If you have, it will become obvious why in a second, but we're going to answer them through our smart devices. Again, everything that we do is optional, so you can chat as much as you like or not at all. You can be camera on, camera off. You can also take part in these questions if you want to, but if you don't, please don't feel like you have to. It's just a little bit of context question for me, so I can just get to know who I'm chatting to for the next couple of hours. So We'll skip on. So this is the first question. So what you'll see on screen, you've got a QR code. If you can't scan the QR code, you can put slido.com into your smart device and then the code with the hashtag there, and I will do it with you at the same time. So I'm just going to scan the barcode and it should take you into the Slido. So if I show you what my screen looks like, that's what you should see on your smart device if you're taking part. So I'll just give it a couple of seconds as people just go through. So looking like at the minute that it's mostly micro organisations. We've got a couple of medium-sized in there, some sole traders. Okay, but we're looking at smaller organisations. Okay. Perfect. So roughly about half, then we've got another 17%. So we're looking at about 2/3 are sole traders or micro type organisations. So I'll skip us on to the next one. So it should automatically update your questions. So if you're any of these, so if you're in the voluntary sector, you might be a social enterprise, you might be a private limited company. Some of us will be both. So we are in Go for Growth, a limited company and a social enterprise. We have our articles of association. We're a registered social enterprise, so I'm going to tick both. Please feel free to tick more than one if they apply to you, and then hit send. So we have got a couple who are in the voluntary sector. That's probably just me, actually, and one other. And most people are a private limited company. Cool. And then final question, just whereabouts are you based? So as I said, everyone is welcome. There is some contextual information around whether people are based in Barnsley or Rotherham, or for providers who are seeking to work in Barnsley and Rotherham. So we'll pop that in. Okay, so we've got a good amount from Barnsley, some from Rotherham, and some also from the wider South Yorkshire and Yorkshire region. Just for those that don't know, I'm based in Southwest Scotland, so that's probably the somewhere else. That was my vote. Thank you for that. That's super helpful, actually, for me to know who I'm chatting with today. So if we skip on, I'm going to start by just breaking down the public contracts or the public procurement process into 6 sort of key elements, the key elements that you can see on screen. What I will say is in any public procurement, almost regardless of value, but certainly over threshold, and I will talk us through what those thresholds are shortly, there'll be bidder instructions. You will always get your instructions on what documents you've got, what the timescales are, how to progress through the process. It can feel a little overwhelming, all the instructions, and certainly in some procurement competitions, there will be quite a weighty list of documents to read through. Our advice is if you can, try not to be overwhelmed with them. Obviously, don't ignore any of the documents either. You will need to read through pretty much everything in any bid, but they are designed to try and help you navigate the process. If you have questions on them, of course, you can come to Go for Growth and ask those questions. The bidder instructions might be in the invitation to tender document, or they might be a separate document called bidder instructions, for example. But they will definitely be clearly marked. You will see where you can find all of the instructions that you need. And at the front end of any public procurement, there will be something called the procurement specific questionnaire now. So that did used to be called the standard selection questionnaire. Effectively, it's not a pre-qualification, but it's about a selection criteria. It's effectively, in this procurement specific questionnaire, there's 3 parts to it and 32 questions, including a confirmation at the end of it. Depending on how big or complex the procurement is and what sector you're in, so potentially in social care, you might not need to answer all of the questions in the procurement specific questionnaire, but you might equally be asked to answer all 32. But effectively, the procurement specific questionnaire or the standard selection questionnaire, as was under the old regulations, is about understanding your business, who you are, where you are, how big you are, what your financial and economic standing is, what your previous contracts and competency looks like, what you've been doing, etc. So it is around a selection criteria, and you might have some pass-fail threshold type questions in there. So it's unlikely in smaller tenders, for example, that there would be a financial and economic threshold. So it's unlikely in lower value tenders that you would need to meet a minimum turnover threshold. But those are some of the things that you might see in a selection questionnaire, and it's now called the procurement specific questionnaire. You can see on screen actually that items 2, 3, 5, and 6 are all blue and underlined. That's because there's a live link in the background. So when the slide deck comes out to you, if you click on any of those 4, it will take you to a lunch and learn 20-minute session that we ran that delves into more detail on those topics. So if you haven't answered a procurement that was put into the market after the 24th of February this year yet, if you haven't done a new procurement when the regulations went live, you might not have seen the procurement specific questionnaire yet. And bits of it are very similar, in fact, identical to the standard selection questionnaire, but there are bits that are different as well. So if you need any further help and guidance and detail, if you click through that link to the PSQ, you'll be able to watch that lunch and learn video that breaks it all down for you. We go through all of those questions in there. You've then got something called a specification, which I mean, it does what it says on the tin. It is a description of what the contracting authority is effectively trying to buy. There'll also be an evaluation criteria. So that's a description of how whatever responses you're putting into that tender will be scored. And if there are any weightings, and we're going to go through evaluation criteria and weightings just before and during the live exercise as well. And again, there's a live video tutorial through for the lunch and learn session if you want to click through that. There'll be quality and technical questions, and they will often include social value in them. So in any procurement, 100% of the marks, there'll be some sort of split potentially between quality and pricing and social value. So what you might see of 100% of marks available, that there is 50% to quality, 30% to cost, and 20% to social value. Any of those breakdowns of how the scores are made up will all be really clear in those bidder instruction documents. So you will always know what the contracting authority is really focusing the emphasis on. Is it really high on quality, really high on social value, or really high on price? It will tell you. And there is something called the most advantageous tender. So in procurement, pre the regulatory change, it was the way that we tested who won was something called the most economically advantageous tender, which in a really rough roundabout sort of way felt like it translated into the fastest race to the bottom, cheapest price wins. And whilst that wasn't actually genuinely the case, it could often feel like it. The transition from MEET, most economically advantageous tender, to MAT, most advantageous tender, is important in that it's telling procurers, buyers in the public sector that you do not have to award based on price, that if the total value, if social outcomes, if environmental outcomes, if quality outcomes are the most important thing, then that's where you can put the most of the weighting. So lots of buyers wouldn't have needed the transition to reflect that, but I think it's an important message from the Cabinet Office to public sector procurement that it isn't a fastest race to the bottom. Value is very subjective, and we're looking for value for money. Of course, this is often it's a regulated process, but even if we're not above the regulatory thresholds, there will be legal terms and conditions that are at play. Again, we did a lunch and learn where it's not legal advice, but we are looking at, as practitioners, the most common legal terms and working through them to let you know what they might mean, and crucially, what happens if those legal terms go wrong and you find yourself on the wrong side of them. So have a look at that if you want to. Also, if you're a member of a network organisation like your local chambers or the Federation of Small Businesses, for example, you will have, as part of that membership, access to their legal advice helpline. if you've got questions on legal terms and conditions, there are some big things in there like the TUPE legislation, which is the Transfer and Undertakings and Protection of Employment legislation. It's a clunky and chunky piece of legislation. If TUPE is at play in a bid that you're going for, it can often be really useful to try and get some legal advice to make sure that you understand that legislation and any of the responsibilities that you would have to it. And then finally, there's feedback. So at the back end of any process, depending on the kind of process it is, but in most processes, there are either winners or losers. And if you're successful, you should get feedback of why your bid was successful. But equally, if you were unsuccessful, you should get feedback to say why you were unsuccessful. And that feedback should be your score, the winning bidder's score, and then detailed enough feedback that is helpful for our bidders to be able to improve for future opportunities, whether it's with that contracting authority or not. Under the regulatory threshold, there is no legal requirement to give that level of detail in feedback. So the feedback process is only mandatory when we're above the threshold. And for goods and services, the threshold, including VAT, is currently £214,904, including VAT. So if you're working in opportunities that are under that threshold, then it is really reliant on whoever you're bidding with to determine whether or not they're going to give detailed feedback. Above threshold, you will get something called an assessment summary, which will have a good level of detail in it. But underneath that, it's really down to the contracting authority. If you don't get enough detail in the feedback, you can, of course, ask for it through whatever portal that you're working in. All okay so far? I'm going to quickly just show you what the contract procedure rules are in Barnsley and Rotherham. So in Barnsley, for Barnsley Council, this is, so other contracting authorities that are based in Barnsley might be different. But Barnsley, up to 5,000, the requirement can be progressed by a single quotation. No requirement to publish it on Contracts Finder or on the Contracts Register. So under 5,000, if that's the level that you're working at, then you may not, it might not be advertised. It might be a single quotation. You might be invited to give the quotation. We're just going to take a question just on the feedback. So what's the obligation for the local authority to give more detailed feedback if asked? And is there a timescale in which they should respond? Underneath that threshold that I talked about, that 214,904, there is no obligation at all. So you can ask the question, but we can't compel them to give feedback in any detail. Good practice would suggest they would want to give you something, but there is no obligation from them. And again, there is no, therefore, detailed timescale in which they would have to respond. And we have, as Go for Growth, asked for feedback when we've been unsuccessful under threshold and have not received anything back from it. So you are in the lap of the contracting authority, whoever that might be, when you're under threshold in terms of feedback. It is our encouragement to every public sector organisation to, wherever they can, to at least respond to feedback requests, because not everybody will want it under threshold, and to do as much as they possibly can. But there is no dedicated obligation in there, I'm afraid. So in terms of Barnsley, when we're looking from 5,000 up to 50,000, what we can see in there, they're called the contract procedure rules. Again, this is blue and underlined, so you will see that's a live link to the procedure rules themselves that you can click through to. They are looking at prioritising placing orders with local businesses under the council's social value policy. So either a single quote or a quote process to select the supplier between 5 and 50,000. Getting up to 100,000 or 250,000, where it's works and not goods and services. They're looking for at least 2 companies in the local area to be invited to quote, and they go on to define what local looks like. And that should be internally done through a quote process using a best value form, so that they can see and justify who was given the work and why they were giving the order thereafter. Over 100,000, the procurement teams centrally are then involved. So Up to that 100,000, the central procurement team won't necessarily be involved at all. It will be down to the service delivery leads, or £250,001 if that's works, and then up to the regulation threshold. So it must be led by the procurement team, and an open tender procedure must be followed unless they're using something like a framework, a dynamic purchasing system, or a dynamic market. And a dynamic purchasing system, they no longer exist under the new regulations, but if they were in place before the regulations changed on the 24th of February, they can continue and they can be extended up to February 2029. So it might be, if you're already on a dynamic purchasing system, that you can get that work. And I believe you can still apply to those dynamic purchasing systems until they close in 2029 or whenever they close before that. A dynamic market works largely on the same principles as a dynamic purchasing system, in that they're always open and you can always apply for them. The big difference between the two is a dynamic purchasing system can be used under that 214,904 threshold that I talked about. A dynamic market can't. It has to be above threshold, and all of the call-off processes have to be above threshold for a dynamic market. But Barnsley are saying they have got a commitment to local, to inviting quotes, and to trying to simplify the process for those lower value procedures wherever they possibly can. So if we look at Rotherham, and again, there's a link out to their financial and procurement procedure rules, so they call them the FPPR in Rotherham as opposed to the CPRs. So less than 10,000 procurement procedure rules don't apply to contracts for less than 10,000. So the service delivery leads, if you have a relationship with them, they might be inviting you to quote, they might be able to give you the business directly, but what they're saying is the procedural rules don't apply up to 10,000. So from 10,000 to 25, it's either you're using something that already exists, like a framework or a dynamic purchasing system that we've just talked about, or you're inviting informal quotations from a specific amount of businesses, so businesses that you know, and one of those must be a local supplier. So again, there's a real commitment to driving local from Rotherham. And up to 100,000, either a call off from something that already exists, or 3 quotations as a minimum, again, one of which must be through a local supplier. But they're now saying it must also go through the council's e-tendering portal, which is your tender. I'm going to show you, I will talk more about that on the next slide. At 100,000 up to 189,330, which I think is the regulatory threshold minus VAT. That's either call off from those existing frameworks or dynamic purchasing systems again, or now we're undertaking a formal tender, which would be advertised to the open market through the council's e-tendering portal, which is your tender, or through Contracts Finder, which is a government free search engine for opportunities. And then as the threshold comes in Rotherham, it must be whatever it is competitively tendered in accordance with the procurement legislation, using one of the procurement procedures that we'll talk through at the back end of today's session. And it is coordinated at that point through the corporate procurement team. So that's the central procurement team in Rotherham. So just to go through all of the thresholds, I've mentioned that goods and services is 214,904. That's for the wider public sector. If you were interested in bidding for central government goods and services, that threshold is lower. It's actually 139,688 if you're bidding for central government type of works, goods and services, sorry. If you're bidding for works, so construction type stuff, the threshold is much higher at 5,372,609. And that's when the regulations kick in for works. So underneath that level, it wouldn't be classed as a regulated procurement. And then you have something called the light touch regime, which is typically used for social care. And the government issue a list of the things that fall under light touch regime. The threshold for that is 663,540. So if a procurement is being let under the light touch regime, the threshold is much higher than the normal threshold for goods and services. So I don't know how practiced you are in finding opportunities in the public sector or in Yorkshire, and certainly in Barnsley and Rotherham, but there are effectively three ways that I'm just going to chat us through. So what we have for Yorkshire and the Humber, and all local authorities are on this portal, is powered by a system called EU Supply, and it's called Your Tender. And there is a click through that you can go to that will take you, if you haven't registered for Your Tender, it will take you there and you can register for it. And then you can see all of the live opportunities that are open to the open market through any local authority in Yorkshire. The EU supply system is fairly intuitive, but what we have on our YouTube, YouTube channel, that's the word. We've got tutorial videos for all of these. If you're not familiar with Your Tender, you can go on our YouTube channel, type in Your Tender, and there is a registration video in there, how to express interest and how to get your documents. But there is something called Contracts Finder that is a government search engine, and effectively, usually you will see any opportunity above 25,000. So if we are in the lower value opportunities below those thresholds that we talked about, Contracts Finder is a good place to go. And you can type into the search engine the type of business that you're looking for. So you might type in consultancy, support to live at home, community services, whatever it might be, air conditioning, maintenance, etc. You can type whatever those words are into the search engine, and it will show you what opportunities there are. You can drill down into geographical postcode area, Yorkshire and the Humber, for example, or nationally. You can drill down by a procurement code if you know it, etc., etc. And then it will tell you who the opportunity is for, when the opportunity is live till, etc. So, and it's free of charge to use, so it can often be a useful search engine to find opportunities on. But the final thing we have is something called Find a Tender Service. And again, it's a live link. And you might have heard people talking about something called the Central Digital Platform. When the procurement regulations went live, the Cabinet Office launched something called the Central Digital Platform. It is the Find a Tender Service. They are the same thing. So this link here will take you to the Central Digital Platform. So it's also there as well. And the Central Digital Platform is important to us because it's where all above threshold opportunities have to be advertised. So if we are above that 214,904 for the wider public sector in goods and services, it will be advertised on the Find a Tender service. And any notices, so if there's a pipeline that's been issued, if there's a pre-market engagement event going on, all those notices will be issued in one place, and it's the first time that they've all been issued in one place. There's also a supplier information system that sits at the heart of it. So on the Find a Tender service, you can search for opportunities without registering for it. But if you want to interact with any of those opportunities and ultimately go on to bid anything, you will have to complete the supplier registration system. I've put there a YouTube video tutorial of how to go through the registration to the Central Digital Platform. If you want to bid now for an above threshold opportunity, you'll need your unique identifier and you'll need a share code. And both of those things you'll get through the Central Digital Platform. So if you do want to bid anything above threshold in the public sector, wherever it is mandatory that you register to the Find a Tender service. However, you can search for opportunities without that registration to the system. And over time, we'll be able to add more of our information in. And the reason that's a positive for us as bidders, and especially small businesses, once we put our information into that supplier information system, who we are, how big we are, what our insurances are, our accreditations we can add in there. We can go through any of the grounds for exclusion that exist. We do it all once, and then we don't have to do it again in the live bid that we're bidding for. So the central digital platform is trying to be useful for bidders so that we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over and over again every time we're bidding with that core information about us as a business. So we can update it in the central digital platform, the Find a Tender service, if anything changes as we go, if we add accreditations, if we change our insurance levels, etc. But that will automatically pull through to the bid, which should hopefully save us bidders some time and avoid some duplication. So I'm going to just pause a second and see how everyone's doing and see if there's any questions before we move into specification and answering quality questions, and then we get into the live evaluation exercise. Is everybody doing all right? I know it's a quick canter that we're going through, so if you do want to stop me and ask any questions, please do feel free. I'll just check there's nothing in the chat. No, we're all right for the minute. So we're going to start with the specification. So we'll dive into a bit more detail. So, it does, and forgive me if it feels super obvious what the specification is. It does what it says on the tin. It is the specification in that it is a really detailed, or it should be a fairly detailed look at what the contracting authority wants to buy and what's important to them. So why are they buying it? Usually you'll get some, potentially you'll get some background information in there, but it is, in our view at least, one of the most crucial documents. And our advice would be one of the first jobs that we would do as a potential bidder is read through that specification really thoroughly. And we use that specification as a real working document when we're bid writing, in that if we read through the specification, we can tick off the things that we can do. It's a way of us making sure that we can deliver that specification for our potential customer. We can highlight any evidence that we might have that we might be able to enter into our bid submission into the quality questions. We can also make a note if there's anything that we don't do that's in the specification, and we can ask ourselves, can we do that easily? Do we not want to do that? If we don't want to do it, is it a material or substantial enough gap that means we shouldn't bid this anymore? We can use the specification to help us determine how well matched we are to this opportunity. And we can also use it to pull any questions that we might have together as a starter for 10. So in every procurement process, there's something called the clarification process. It's a time-sensitive process. And what that really means in lay terms are that we have a certain period of time to ask any questions that we've got, and then the clarification period will close and we can't ask any questions after that. So if we've got questions for our contracting authority that would alter how we bid, or even if we bid at all, our advice would be to ask them as early as possible. You do it through the portal. There's a messaging function in the portal, in any portal that you're working on. It exists obviously also in your tender. And the question that you ask goes into a clarification log, and those answers are sent out to everybody. So if you want to, what you can do is download the clarification question log that already exists. See if your question's already been asked and answered. If it hasn't, you can then ask the question, but it often can be a speedier way of getting information is looking at that clarification log first. But we use the specification as a real starting block for how well matched are we to this opportunities. Can we do it? Do we have any gaps? Do we have any questions? Where is my evidence? That kind of thing. And one thing to note on the specification, it's also really important to the contracting authority in that the quality questions that will get asked, they will be testing our ability to deliver that specification. So we shouldn't ever be asked a quality question on something that isn't included in the specification. It's called undisclosed criteria. So a contracting authority can only ask and test us on in those quality questions what's in that specification. That's how pivotal a document it is for both bidder and procurer. And it's really testing our ability to be able to deliver what they're trying to buy. So we'll be referring back to the specification when we're answering questions. The way I kind of look at it, and forgive me if this sounds dead obvious, is it's a bit like a job application process in that you've got a job description and a person spec. And when you write your job application, you're going to be referring back to that job description and that person spec and saying in your application, I can do this job because I've got this experience, or I will have that experience, or I will do it this way. A bid is not really any different. You're looking at the specification and the evaluation criteria, and then you're answering the questions, relaying your experience in the context of what they're trying to buy. So it's like a slightly different lens, but a very similar process to a job application, and how as a candidate you would use the job description and the person spec. So that's the specification. What you'll also have in any bid is something called evaluation criteria. That's the scoring criteria. So it will tell you how they're going to score the question. So each question will have potentially an individual weighting. They might be pass-fail questions, but they're usually, if they're scored, they will have an individual weighting. So if in 100% of marks, say 50% were going to quality, and there were 5 questions under that quality heading, you might have 5 questions all weighted at 10%, or you might have 1 question weighted at 30%, 1 weighted at 10%, and the rest might have the rest of the weighting that's left over. But those weightings are really useful to us as bidders because they tell us how important that question is. So the higher the weighting, the more focus we want to give that question, because if we score really high, I remember doing my procurement exams, and every time I did an exam, one of the questions was worth 50% of the marks. So I knew I had to nail that question, because if I didn't, it was going to be really tough to get top marks on all the other questions put together. So the weightings are like that. They tell us where we need to focus our efforts. So the higher the weighting, that's where we really want to focus on how we get the best possible marks that we can. There might be something called a minimum score that you need to reach. So we'll look at an actual evaluation criteria shortly. But sometimes it will be like 0 to 5, and it might be that you have to score a 3 in order for all the other questions to continue to be scored. So they're called threshold questions. You have to meet that minimum threshold for the rest of your bid to be looked at. But again, all of those things will be really clear to you as a bidder if you have got a minimum pass mark for a particular question or not, or if there's any sort of threshold that applies, it will be super clear. And then when we're answering questions, and I've only got a couple more slides before we're going to do a bit of this together. When we're answering questions, this is not the Holy Grail as per Jill, but hopefully it's a bit helpful. You will find your own way, but this is the way we try and look at it. I've got an example for you in a second. If we try and break the question down into the verb elements, so what are the doing elements of a question? And those doing elements, we can then almost tick those off to make sure we've included them in our answer. Because again, part of what we've got to do is answer all of the question that's been asked of us. We don't need to answer other things that haven't been asked, but we must answer all of the question that we have been asked by the contracting authority. And so being able to break the question down can be helpful, actually, so that we know. You can get bidder blindness a little bit. You can't mark your own homework, so you know what's in your head. The job of getting it down on paper can be complex. So if you are ticking off, have I answered that part of that question, that part of that question, that part of that question, it can be a useful mechanical process to go through to make sure we answer all of it. And of course, what we want to do is we want to talk about the how as well. So I have evaluated thousands, literally thousands of procurements in my career. And I will always remember I was evaluating a construction procurement, and I'm not necessarily a construction expert. And you won't always have a subject matter expert that's evaluating your tender either. Somebody said to me in the modern slavery section, we are world class at eradicating modern slavery. And I thought, brilliant, this is amazing. But that's where it ended. What they didn't go on to tell me is how they were world class at it. They didn't back it up with any evidence. And we can all make a grand claim. But what we have to do, if we say we do something, we need to think about the so what of that. So if we ask ourselves, I've put that we have a really robust process in managing data protection. Brilliant. What does that robust process look like? What do we do to make it robust? How can I evidence that? How can I tell that story that backs it up and leaves my evaluator with absolutely no doubt that I can do what I've said I'm going to do? And how do I wrap that into the context of the specification? You'll find in lots of quality questions that there are constraints that are applied. So it might be that you're only allowed so many words, or you're only allowed so many pages, for example. So if there is a word count, and we're going to use the word count in our mock tender in a second, don't go over it. Double check it, triple check it. If it's a 500 word count and you put 550 words in, the evaluator will not see the final 50 words. They will be redacted. And if that changes the context of what you've written, it's pointless. So we waste our energy and time, and evaluators will never see it. If there's a page count, it's likely that there'll be a font size that goes with it. And that's to make sure that everybody gets the same amount of space to write. So if there is a page count, it might say Arial font size 11, for example. Again, don't do it in a different font size. Don't go over the 2 pages, because it will simply get redacted. And it could, in a page count, it could, I mean, I guess it's unlikely, but you could be disqualified, because you would, if they evaluated it, if you used font size 8 in your 2 pages, you could write a lot more than somebody who was using font size 11. And so it creates an unfair advantage, and they can't allow that. And what they won't necessarily do is just make it bigger to font size 11 and cut off at the second page. So you run the risk of counting yourself out if you don't observe those constraints. It might be that you can't use tables or diagrams, or you can't add any attachments to it. If you're unsure of any of it, ask a clarification question, but it should be really clear what is and what isn't allowed. And if I show you an example actually of how we break this down. So this is a real bid. It's an old one now that's no longer live, but it was a real bid, 3 questions that went out from a real local authority in Yorkshire. And the first question, as you can see down the right-hand side, for example, the weighting. So question number 1 has got a 25% weighting, question 2 has got a 15% weighting, and question 3 is for information only. So we know if we're resource constrained, especially, we're going to focus our efforts on this first question because it's got the most marks available to it. We can also see that there are word count constraints and no attachments allowed. So we know we've got 600 words, that first question, to score as highly as possible. And highlighted in yellow are the verb elements, the doing elements that I talked about. So on that particular first question on care plans, it talks about how do you ensure that care plans are individually tailored, person-centered, and meet the needs and outcomes of the person. And then how do we ensure that those care plans are kept up to date? What measures are in place to ensure people are involved in their care planning, and how we link with partners to ensure needs are met. So when I break that down, there's 6 doing elements to that particular question. And so in my 600 words, I should be able to cross-reference to those 6 individual bits and say, where have I shown that my care plans are individually tailored? Where have I shown that they're person-centered? Where have I shown that they meet the needs and outcomes of the person, etc.? And you can almost literally physically tick it off. And what we find is if we do that, we're probably using more word count than we've got available to us. So it's then about refining it. On this particular bid, there was one bid response, And the answer was, yes, we have care plans. And unsurprisingly, it didn't elicit the best possible score that it could. So if we break down the question, it can be super helpful for us in terms of working out what exactly it is that they want to know about. And then if we refer back to the specification, in this particular specification, it talked a lot about what being person-centered means, how they manage the expectation of people being involved in their own care planning, and who partners were, and how they would expect those links to partners to be made and managed. So the specification became really helpful in terms of answering those 6 parts of the question. All okay so far? Cool. Right. So we're going to do a bit of work. Let me just stop recording for a second. Okay. So thank you actually for everybody taking part of that. It was really useful to hear your feedback and and see what you thought. Hopefully that was useful. The other thing I would say as well is if you have got a question that you're struggling with in a bid, Go for Growth don't offer bid writing or full bid review services just because we can't resource it. But I'll always sit around a table and go through a question with you. So that might be a virtual table via Teams or whatever. But if you want some support, do feel free to ask. The more time you can give us, the better. So if you ask the day before your bid's got to be submitted, and me and my colleagues are training all day, we might not be able to do it. So the more notice you give us, the better equipped we'll be able to support. But please always ask if you do want to just chat a question through or whatever. So social value and carbon reduction. You might be familiar with something called the Public Services Act. It used to be called the Social Value Act, or it's often colloquialised as the Social Value Act, but it's actually called the Public Services Act of 2012. It was assented to law in January 2013. So it's not a new piece of legislation. Effectively, it talks about what social value is in the public sector, and it speaks to something called the National Procurement Policy Statement, which I'll chat you through when we get to the regulations in a second. But effectively, it's reinforcing the message that procurement's not just about the lowest price. It's about the need to take a much broader view of value for money. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. If you've been to any of the social value sessions that we run in Go for Growth, you might have heard me talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Basically, they are part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that has been adopted by all United Nations member states back in 2015, actually. And it provides that Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and planet now and into the future. And at the heart of that Agenda for Sustainable Development are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And they are an urgent call for action by all countries, both developed and developing, in a global partnership. And so each of those goals, they've been adopted by UK government as part of the United Nations. You will see those themes, sometimes very specifically. SDG number 1, no poverty, might be in a bid in the social value section. So there was a bid that we did tender ready training for the City of Bradford local authority, and their social value questions were on reducing poverty, and that clearly links to goal number 1, Sustainable Development Goal number 1, which is no poverty. But it might be a bit more subtle than that. It might not say it is SDG number whatever, but you will be able to tie themes back to one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and they can be really useful if we're trying to work out as organisations what social value means to us. So in Go for Growth, we are aligned with really 2 of the Sustainable Development Goals. I would never say to anybody, you must align with all 17. It would be probably just too big. We align primarily with Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth, because Go for Growth is all about trying to help other businesses manage sustainable growth. But we also are aligned to goal number 7, which is affordable and clean energy. So we do a lot of work on scope 3 carbon reduction type of stuff as well. So all of our social value narrative really comes back to those two goals. And we might have other bits that link in, and the outcomes might be reduced poverty or good education or zero hunger or whatever it might be. But the actual goals that we're aligned to are goals 7 and 8. And it might be useful for businesses to have a look at those sustainable developments and goals and say, actually, that's important to us. That's something that we can do. But in terms of Barnsley and Rotherham, both have got really quite clear and documented social value policies. So on both their websites, you can go and have a look at their social value policy. I'll put the link in the slide deck when they come out. So there's something called Barnsley 2030 in Barnsley. If you live in Barnsley, you might well be aware of it. But effectively, there's 4 themes of Barnsley 2030: healthy Barnsley, learning Barnsley, growing Barnsley, and sustainable Barnsley. So you can think about where your organisation can support and enable one of those 4 themes. And it's likely in their tenders that they will be aligning their social value section to one of those 4 themes, if not all 4. And they use something called the TOMS, Themes, Outcomes and Measures in Barnsley. And actually we have, and I'll send these out as well, we've got 2 courses in Barnsley, an introduction to social value, and then one that looks more specifically at the TOMS, which is just about to get signed off to go live. So there'll be free courses, they're really short, but will help you dive into a bit more detail in Barnsley. In Rotherham, they've also got a social value policy, which has got 6 key themes around raising living standards for residents, a strong local economy with employment and skills opportunities and a growing business base. Young people have opportunity to develop skills and find worthwhile employment. Equality of opportunity for disadvantaged people and communities, including disabled people, strengthened and sustainable community and voluntary sector, and greater environmental sustainability, including accessible green public spaces. And again, Rotherham use the TOMS, the themes, outcomes and measures. They use them via the social value portal. So in a bid for Rotherham Council, you will more than likely be answering the social value section of that bid via something called the social value portal. And all your instructions of how to use that portal will be in the bid. And I know social value portal really well, and they've got lots of guidance and support on their platform as well. But both councils use the themes, outcomes and measures, which looks at things like newly created employment through this contract, retained employment through this contract, developing skills locally. So you'll see the themes and outcomes and measures that align with those social value policies, but are proportionate and relevant to that specific contract that you're looking at. So it might be that you're asked, for example, if you were successful in winning this contract, are there any new jobs that you would create for it? Or if you're the incumbent, if you remain the incumbent, are there any jobs that would be retained as a result of that, etc., etc. What your training, learning, skills development might be, how many apprenticeships you might put in place, T-level qualifications, what would you do in terms of voluntary work, etc., etc. So that's in a super short fashion what social value is. And it is the headline term in the public sector is social value. And so it includes and incorporates anything that's to do with the environment. And there is a very specific theme on carbon reduction at the moment. So both Barnsley and Rotherham councils declared a climate emergency in 2019. And these are the targets that they've set. So Barnsley have said they want to be net zero as a council by 2040 and then as a borough by 2045. And Rotherham have said net zero as a council by 2030 and as a borough by 2040. That really, super aggressive targets for Rotherham. In Barnsley, they operate actually through Go for Growth, a free programme for local businesses on your carbon reduction. So if you're a business, you must be based in Barnsley, but if you are based in Barnsley and you are interested in calculating your carbon emissions if you haven't already, and creating a carbon reduction plan if you haven't already, or at least letting Barnsley know what your calculations and your carbon reduction plan looks like if you have got them already. You can do that on a free basis through the Go for Growth programme. So the only constraint is that you must be based in Barnsley as a business. So if you want more details of that, please drop me an email on it and I'll send the details out. But we will see in both councils' procurement competitions questions around have you got a carbon reduction plan? They might want a copy as part of the bid, or it might be that they say we don't need a copy as part of the bid, but if we require it during delivery, we want to know that it is there and ready and that it's producible, etc., etc. In both cases, they are rapid targets, and it will require all of the business community that are suppliers and in borough in order to meet those targets, especially the borough-based targets. So in 15 years, the whole of Rotherham borough should be net zero. So that's every household and every business that sits in the Rotherham borough. So we'll all need to have our carbon actions in place by then. So that's the target. So we'll see more of this in bids. And both social value and carbon combined under that heading of social value, it can often be up to a 20% weighting in a bid. So it can be bid winning, and therefore it can also be bid losing. So we are seeing the importance of this social and environmental value really ramping up. So if you don't know where to start with it, if you've never started on either social value or carbon, regardless of where you're based, please feel free to get in touch with me at Go for Growth and we can help you on it. Right, and lastly, and I don't know if it's good or bad that we're finishing on the regulations. I might just finish you all off with regulations at the back end of a 2-hour session. I'm grateful you're all still with me. I'm hoping you're all still with me anyway. We're going to really talk very briefly through the regulations change. At the top end of it, I wanted to make you aware of something called the National Procurement Policy Statement. Now, I think procurement can be a game changer if it's done right. And effectively, the National Procurement Policy Statement, it describes what's important to public procurement. It is a document that I know I would want to read because I'm a procurer by trade, but it is one that I would recommend if you want to understand culturally what the public sector is trying to achieve, then the National Procurement Policy Statement is a good document to read. It's not massive either. It's not 100 pages of waffle. It's quite succinct. You can have a look at it in here in the slide deck. This is a live link. So it will send you to the National Procurement Policy Statement. But it's thinking about kickstarting economic growth, making Britain a clean energy superpower, taking back our streets. So that's thinking about crime reduction, breaking down barriers to opportunity for disadvantaged or underrepresented groups, and building a national health service fit for the future. And throughout all of that, it talks about local businesses, sole traders, micro social enterprises. It talks about delivering value for money. And it actually says in there, and I'm going to quote this for you, contracting authorities can deliver value for money by driving economic growth and strengthening supply chains by giving small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, and voluntary community and social enterprises, VCSEs, a fair chance creating high-quality jobs and championing innovation. So all throughout the National Procurement Policy Statement, it speaks to that local agenda of doing business with smaller organisations, of making the procurement process as accessible as possible. And there is a positive duty in the procurement regulations to consider what those barriers are for smaller organisations, micro businesses, the voluntary sector, third sector organisations. And whilst it's not enshrined in law, there is therefore, I think, the need for contracting authorities to think about how they can practicably remove those barriers. So what are those barriers and how do we remove them? Is that by having smaller lots in a procurement, having geographical lots? If we're under threshold, is that reserving a procurement for a local smaller organisation? what are the tools that we've got and the regulations have given us so that we can be as accessible and inclusive as possible. There is a link on the screen that you can see, which is to a procurement policy note 001. The government have sort of backed up the National Procurement Policy Statement. That's my words, by the way, by telling central government at least that they must set targets for direct spend with small and medium enterprises and VCSEs, voluntary community and social enterprises. A 2-year target for a 3-year target for direct spend with SMEs and a 2-year target for direct spend with VCSEs to be achieved in the financial year ending March 28, and for those results to be published annually. Now, it's voluntary for the wider public sector. So local authorities, local councils, NHS trusts are not mandated to do that. But my hope is that because we are really trying to be open for business and include smaller organisations in procurement, that more public sector organisations will set those targets up and we'll see them even where it's not mandated. But in essence, what the regulatory change is trying to do is to simplify the bidding process, to give more transparency. So as bidders, we can see more of what's going on and use tools that are easier and have more longevity in them, such as frameworks and dynamic markets. I'm going to talk you through these in a sec. So the simplified bidding process, what you can see on the left-hand side is what the European regulations, public contract regulations of 2015, what we had. So we had a number of processes that we could use, 4, 5, 6 in there, 7 if you include design contest. But now, actually, that's now 3. So open procedure and open procedure are largely the same. So that means it's a single staged procurement. There is no restriction on the number of submissions. There's no pre-qualification period for it because it's that single stage. So what we think is that it's most likely, and what we're seeing is there's lots of open procedures being advertised. It was a popular procedure before, it remains a popular procedure now. And then we've got something called the competitive flexible procedure, which takes 4 of those procedures on the left and puts it into one. So it replaces those 4. Effectively, the competitive flexible procedure does a bit what it says on the tin. It's a multi-stage process. It will have at least 2 stages in it. And selection and deselection can happen at any stage. There might be more stages. You might be doing presentations, best and final offer, different things. But effectively, that competitive flexible procedure can be designed with the specific outcomes in mind of that procurement. So it could be that there are 3 or 4 stages in the competitive flexible procedure. And the challenge that an organisation like Go for Growth has got is they could be different every time they're run, because they don't have to have the same amount of stages every time, and they don't have to have the same things at the same stages every time. So what we did recently, we had a webinar with YPO. You can see it on our YouTube channel, where we had a look at competitive flexible procedure. We delved into more detail of what it actually is, and we talked through 2 or 3 that were live in the market and what they looked like and the stages that were in it. So if you want more detail on competitive flexible procedure, head to that YouTube channel and just type competitive flexible procedure in and it will come up. And they have something called direct award. And what direct award doesn't mean is that you can't be bothered to run the process of procurement, and so you're just going to direct award. Like the negotiated procedure without prior publication, direct award can only be used in special circumstances. If you need any help getting to sleep at night, there is a list of justifications for direct award listed in regulations 41 to 43 of the Procurement Act if you want to have a look. But it will be things like where there is a genuine emergency, act of war, and something that is absolutely out with normal process applicability. What does that mean to us as suppliers? I mean, it largely depends on what process public sector buyers are using. If they do continue to run a lot of open procedures, then we might not actually feel a huge amount of difference. But I'm going to go on to frameworks in a second, and they are quite different. And competitive flexible procedure is quite different, but not everybody is using them. So it will largely depend. If you see an opportunity and again, you want some help deciphering what it means or the process, that is why we exist. So please come and give us a shout. But transparency is one of the big elements of the regulation. So on the left-hand side, which is the European regulations, we only had 4 notices that had to be published. And remember, this is above threshold, so above that 214,904 for goods and services. Now, under the Procurement Act, there's 15. So on that central digital platform, that find a tender service that we talked about, all of these notices will be there. So if there is a preliminary market engagement event happening, something that will give you early insight into a procurement that's coming up, or a planned procurement, or a pipeline, those notices have to be issued on the central digital platform. It means we've got one place to go and we can see a lot more than we ever used to be able to see. In the Find a Tender Service tutorials, you'll be able to see how to select some of those things as well. So, but also importantly, it goes right the way through the process, not just at the front end. So contract performance notices, again, they're above a certain threshold, but we can see how things are performing. We can see how payment performance is being made. So contracting authorities have to pay within 30 days of when the invoice is received. And if they don't, they have to publish a performance notice on it. So we can now see that, whereas we couldn't before. So there's just a ton more transparency than we ever had before. Click on. So frameworks, we might be familiar with frameworks. Effectively, what they are is a giant contract. So organisations like YPO, ESPO, Crown Commercial Service, NEPO, Blue Light Commercial, there's lots of them. They're called public sector buying organisations. What they will do is they'll let a big contract out into the market, and then other contracting authorities like Barnsley Council, Rotherham Council will effectively call off from that contract. So it might be, if you were in legal services, for example, that you bid to join the YPO legal services framework, and then Barnsley Council want to buy legal services, solicitors' advice, for example, and they're using the YPO framework, they'll run a much smaller competition, and only the people that are on that framework would be invited to take part in that further competition. Frameworks under the old regulations were all closed. So if you were on it, you were on it, and if you weren't, you couldn't get on it until it reopened again, usually 4 years later or less, never more than 4 years. Now, frameworks is something called an open framework, which can last up to 8 years, and it will have 2 reopening points at year 3 and year 5. And so now, if you want to get onto the YPO legal services framework, and you either didn't see it or you didn't get on it the first time around, you have the ability to try and get on it at other points in the framework life as well. And if you stay on it, it means that you can effectively be on that framework for 8 years as opposed to 4. And I want to show you an example of how this works. So we've got, on this particular framework, we've got supplier 1, they're an existing supplier. We've got supplier 2, 3, 4, and 5. And suppliers 1, 2, and 3, they applied to the framework when it was first let in year 1. And at year 3, it's reopened. And you have a choice at year 3. You can either have your original framework submission reassessed and make no changes, or you can submit a new tender to be reassessed at that year 3. And of course, because it's open, new suppliers can also put their bid in. So on this particular example, let's say there is a maximum of 3 suppliers that can be on that particular framework. We've got 3 existing. Supplier 1 want to use their existing tender submission and that their score was maintained. Supplier 2 wanted to submit a new tender to be assessed, as did existing supplier number 3. And then supplier 4 and 5, they were new, so they put new bid submissions in. What can happen is the scores can change. So framework 1 for supplier 1, their score was 85%. It stayed at 85%. Framework for supplier 2, their original score was 72%. It went up to 75%. Supplier 3, their original score was 70%. Their second submission, which was different, they actually scored less at 65%. And suppliers 4 and 5 only have new scores 74% and 70%. The framework, this particular example, is limited to 3. So suppliers A, B, and D would be awarded to the framework. C, supplier 3 would actually lose their place, and supplier 5 would have been unsuccessful. So on an open framework, when it reopens, if you're already on it, you can choose whether your original submission is reevaluated or whether you put a new submission in. And if there are limited spaces on the framework, there is a risk that you could lose your space that you already had versus retain that space. If you retain it, you could stay on it for 8 years. And if you're a new supplier, you then have 3 opportunities to bid for that framework, where prior there was only 1 at the beginning. Does that make sense? A bit. If you're bidding for an open framework, or you're on one and it gets to the reopen point, which won't be for another 3 years, or at least a couple of years anyway, again, just give us a shout if you've got any questions. And so we'll finish up with just a couple of things on the regulations. What does it mean to us as suppliers? So it does mean that we're likely to see increased competition as people are thinking about how they can be accessible. As we've got open frameworks that are in use, we've got more entrants that can come into them, and that will be good for the public sector. It does mean that there are longer relationship terms available to us. It also means that for good performing suppliers, having that performance potentially in the public domain could be really useful for us. We can use that to show other potential customers how good we are and how well we've been working. It should translate into our ability to grow and scale as organisations. And those assessment summaries, that feedback environment through the Procurement Act, will give us much more detail in lots of ways that we've had before. And there is just this real focus on identifying and then hopefully removing barriers to entry and growth, especially for smaller organisations and the voluntary sector. And how can you get to know the regulations? Well, there are just a plethora of workshops, webinars all over the shop. Go for Growth are doing lots of them, growth hubs, chambers, FSB, lots of organisations are doing webinars. Attend where you can. Often, as is the case with Go for Growth, you can sign up for an event, and if you can't make it for whatever reason at the last minute, you'll always get a copy of the slide deck and of the recording, and lots are like that. Lots of them are free to go to as well. We would always say preparation is key. So things like today, where we're investing in our knowledge base around how we take part in competitions, we can do as much of that as we can. And we think about, have we got everything in our toolkit that we need? So do we have all our policies, our processes, etc.? We have something called the Go for Growth Public Sector Supply Ready Accreditation. It's free of charge. It lasts for 12 months, and it's really light touch on renewal as well. It gives you 12 hours of continued professional development, CPD. It's a good way of testing, do we have everything in our toolkit? And when I say to businesses, are you ready to do business with the public sector? Sometimes they say to me, I don't know if I'm ready. How would I know if I'm ready? And the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation could be a good way of figuring out if you've got any gaps. And in that accreditation, if you find you've got some gaps, there's lots of embedded resources and, of course, wraparound support from Go for Growth. Understand your social value, environmental narratives and impact. What's important to you? Your social value should speak of you as a business. What environmental initiatives that you're running that are important to you, that mirror your values, that help you as a business, commercially as well as socially and environmentally. The process of taking part in public procurement is a digital process now, a fully digital process. So we need to invest in our digital capability. And that can be difficult if we have additional needs, if we have got dyslexia, dyspraxia, if we, there are some challenges around that. So if you need additional support, always let your contracting authority know, and Go for Growth a shout as well if you want to. And from a digital capability perspective, with those things, it is about accepting that we can't apply for bids on a smart device. We can't do it on a tablet or a smartphone. We are going to need a desktop or a laptop. Now, we support providers in libraries a lot of the time when they're working on a desktop. So I'm not saying to you, go and spend thousands on hardware, but we do need to acknowledge that this is a digital process. And then actually monitoring market opportunities is easier than it's ever been through the central digital platform. So keep an eye out. You can set up alerts on all of the portals, but I'll be honest, in my humble personal opinion, I don't think they're very good. Often opportunities will be sent to you that are not necessarily relevant, and the ones that are relevant, you won't always get them in a timely enough manner. So my view would be, and in Go for Growth, what we do is we carve out once a week 15 minutes and we go on to find a tender or contracts finder, and we proactively look for opportunities. But then there are some live links to Cabinet Office knowledge drops that you can go to. You can link through. If you're a smaller organisation, you can look at all of those. The videos are around 15 to 20 minutes in length, so there are some things there that you can have a look at. And we are here to help you. So you can get in touch with us. These will come out in the slide deck. So we've got lots of resources through our website, all of which are free. Everything that we do is free of charge to the marketplace. That public sector supply ready accreditation that I talked about, the link is there to it if you want to have a look at that also. And then there are the courses that I talked about. So in Rotherham, you've got social value, bid skills, and a procurement act courses. The links are live in there to go through. You don't need to register as a learner. We run them as mass online open courses, and you can request a certificate of completion at the end if you want one. And for Barnsley, we've got one social value course, soon to be two, and also the Procurement Act course if you wanted to have a look in more detail at the regulations. And the final slide, and then I promise I'll stop talking and I'll open up for questions. If you want to stay in touch with Go for Growth, we send a monthly newsletter out with what we hope are really relevant and proportionate information that will be helpful in the public sector. We don't spam you to death. We're an opt-in programme and we're guided by what you need and when you need it. So you'll hear from us once a month and nothing else. And you can obviously, under GDPR, you can opt out at any time. So if you would like to get on our website, you can do so. Yes, I am definitely sending all the slides out, and the bits that have been recorded, that recording will also come with the slides. So everything that you've seen today and all the live links will be live once you get the slides. And that's it from me. So I'll stop sharing. And I will just see if there are any questions. Feel free to put it in the chat if you would rather do that than chat to me live. But if you want to chat live, feel free. Hopefully that was useful for everybody that came along. Now we did an hour and 50 minutes. So I am really grateful to everyone for coming along. I've said it a number of times already. I'll say it one last time. If you, when you get out of this session, think, oh, crikey, I wish I'd asked that question. Or if you would just prefer to ask me a question via email, or if you want to have a coffee and a Teams catch up, we are always open for a chinwag. And like I said, if there's any specific questions that you might have in a bid that you want to work through, we can't do full bid review and bid writing purely because of our own resources, but we will do as much as we can to help. So hopefully that's been useful. Thank you for sticking with me for that long. I'll get everything sent out to you. If you need anything else, just give me a shout, and have a good rest of your Tuesday, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Thanks all.